My father told me I was no longer his daughter because I refused to marry the son of his richest business partner. 7 years later, that same man showed up at my front door carrying a suitcase, a DNA report, and a secret my father had taken to his grave. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Claire. And 7 years ago, I was 21 years old, finishing college and living with my parents. From the outside, my family looked perfect. My father, Michael, owned a successful construction company. My mother, Laura, managed our family's finances. We lived in a huge house. We had nice cars. We went on expensive vacations. People constantly told me how lucky I was. What they didn't see was how little control I actually had over my own life. My parents had chosen my school. They had pushed me toward accounting. They had opinions about my friends. They even had opinions about who I should date. My father always said, "Claire, one day you'll understand that I know what's best for you." I believed him, until one Friday night. My father hosted a dinner for his biggest business partner, Victor Hale. Victor owned several construction companies across the country and had recently become extremely wealthy. His son, Daniel, came with him. I'd known Daniel for years. He was polite, successful, intelligent, and honestly, very attractive. But I'd never thought of him romantically. That night, however, Daniel barely spoke to anyone. He kept looking at me. I remember thinking something was strange. Dinner ended around 9. Everyone moved into the living room. My father stood beside the fireplace. "I have an announcement." My mother smiled. Victor laughed. Daniel suddenly stood up. Then he walked toward me. My stomach tightened. He stopped in front of me and got down on one knee. My mother gasped. Victor started clapping. My father smiled. Daniel opened a velvet box. Inside was a diamond ring. "Claire," he said, "I've cared about you for a long time. I know this is sudden, but I want you to be my wife." Everyone looked at me. I looked at Daniel, then my father. My father's expression told me everything. This wasn't a question. It was an expectation. I slowly shook my head. No. The room went silent. Daniel stood. My mother whispered, "Claire." I looked at her. "I'm sorry." My father walked toward me. "You don't have to love him." I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" "Love comes later." "No." His face hardened. "You're embarrassing this family." "I don't care." "You should." "I can't marry someone just because you want me to." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he said something that still hurts to remember. "Fine." He turned around, walked upstairs, and came back with 2 garbage bags. He started throwing my clothes inside. I stood frozen. "Dad, what are you doing?" "You made your choice." My mother began crying. "Michael, please don't do this." He ignored her. I followed him to the front door. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's your problem. I'm your daughter. You're an adult. I don't have anywhere to stay." He opened the door. "Then figure it out." He threw my bags onto the porch. I stood there crying. My mother stood behind him. She wouldn't look at me. Then my father changed the locks. The door closed, and that was it. I was 21 years old. I had $86 in my bank account, 2 garbage bags of clothes, and nowhere to go. I spent that night in my car. The next morning, I called my older cousin. He let me sleep on his couch for 3 weeks. Then I rented a tiny room near campus. I worked 2 jobs, finished college, and slowly built a life without my parents. I stopped calling. They stopped calling too. Except my mother. She called twice. Both times she told me the same thing. "Just apologize to your father." I asked her, "For what?" She never had an answer. Then something strange happened. About 3 months after I moved out, I was cleaning my old college textbooks. A folded envelope fell out of one. I didn't remember putting it there. There was no name. Inside was a bank transfer. $750,000. The money had been transferred from my father's construction company to a company I'd never heard of. I found another document, then another. 7 transfers. Almost $4 million. I immediately called my father. No answer. I called my mother. She picked up immediately. "Where did you get those?" Her voice sounded terrified. I said, "What are they?" "Claire, listen to me." "Mom, what is this?" "Destroy them." "What?" "Burn them. Throw them away. Just don't show anyone." "Why?" She went silent. "Mom?" Finally, she whispered, "You don't understand what you're looking at. Then explain it. Stop asking questions." She hung up. That was the moment I became suspicious. I started researching the companies. Most were shell companies. They had no real employees. No public offices. No normal business activity. Then I found something. One of those companies had been mentioned in a lawsuit involving Victor Hale, my father's biggest business partner. I stared at the screen. The same Victor whose son had proposed to me. The same Victor my father desperately wanted to impress. Something wasn't right. 3 days later, Daniel contacted me. He asked me to meet him at a coffee shop. I almost refused, but I went. He looked nervous. He didn't even order coffee. Instead, he pushed an envelope across the table. Claire, you need to see this. Inside were copies of financial records. My father's company. Victor's company. The same shell companies. I looked at him. What is this? My father has been investigating missing money. How much? Millions. Does he think my father stole it? He thinks someone inside the company did. Who? We don't know. I looked at Daniel. Why are you telling me? He hesitated. Because I think your father knows I'm investigating. I felt a chill. Then why did you propose to me? Daniel looked down. I didn't want to. What? My father told me to. Why? He said our marriage would unite the two families. I laughed. You're serious? Yes. I pushed the papers away. Then your proposal had nothing to do with me. Daniel looked ashamed. I'm sorry. I stood up. Before I left, he said, Claire. I turned around. There's something else. What? Someone has been following you. I laughed nervously. No one is following me. He pulled out his phone. He showed me a picture. It was me, walking across campus. Another. Me leaving the library. Another. Me getting into my car. My blood ran cold. When were these taken? Recently. Who took them? We don't know. I left the coffee shop terrified. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father's behavior. The money. The proposal. The photographs. Everything seemed connected. So I did something stupid. I went back to my father's office. I still had an old access code. I waited until everyone left. Then I entered. I searched his desk. Nothing. I checked his filing cabinets. Nothing. Then I noticed a painting. It was slightly crooked. I moved it. Behind it was a safe. I didn't know the combination. Then I noticed a small note beside his desk. It contained one date. My birthday. I tried it. The safe opened. Inside were documents. Passports. Bank records. A USB drive. And a photograph of me as a baby. I picked it up. My father was standing beside my mother. But he wasn't smiling. He was staring at me. I didn't understand why. Then I heard footsteps. Someone was coming. I quickly closed the safe. I hid behind a cabinet. The door opened. My father walked in. My mother was with him. I heard her say, "She knows." My father asked, "How much?" "The transfers." Silence. Then my mother said, "If she talks to Victor, we're finished." My father replied, "She won't." "How do you know?" "Because she's my daughter." My mother laughed. "You still think she loves you?" My heart was pounding. Then my father said, "If anything happens to Claire, I'll tell the police everything." My mother became silent. "You wouldn't." "I would." I covered my mouth. Then my mother whispered, "You'd destroy your own family?" My father answered, "You already did." I didn't wait. I quietly slipped out through the back door. I went straight to my apartment. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed everything I owned. I moved to another city. I changed my phone number. And I stopped speaking to my family. For the next 7 years, I built my life from scratch. I became an accountant, then a financial investigator. I got married, had a daughter named Emma, bought a small house, and eventually, I stopped thinking about my father every day. I thought the past was finally behind me. I was wrong. 7 years after that dinner, someone knocked on my front door. It was a Tuesday morning. Emma was upstairs getting ready for school. I opened the door and froze. Daniel stood there. He looked completely different. Older, tired. His hair had turned gray. He was holding a suitcase and a brown envelope. "Claire." I almost closed the door. Then he said, "Your father is dead." Everything stopped. "What?" "He died 2 weeks ago." I couldn't speak. "How?" "Heart attack." I stepped backward. My father was dead. The man I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. The man I had hated. The man whose final words to me had been, "Then figure it out yourself." Gone. Daniel held out the envelope. "He left something for you." I didn't take it. "What?" "A letter." "From my father?" "Yes." I finally took it. My hands were shaking. Daniel looked at me. "You need to hear the rest before you open it." "Why?" "Because your father wasn't the person you thought he was." I almost laughed. "He threw me out." "I know. He didn't contact me." "I know. He let me believe he hated me." Daniel nodded. "Because he thought it was the only way to protect you." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Daniel opened his suitcase. Inside were dozens of folders. Bank records, photographs, police reports, medical records, legal documents, and one red notebook. My father's handwriting was on the cover. I whispered, "What is that?" "Everything your father knew." "About what?" Daniel looked directly into my eyes. "Your mother." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" Daniel took a breath. "Your father discovered that your mother had been stealing from his company. I already knew about the money. But Daniel continued. She wasn't stealing alone. Who was helping her? Richard Cole, my father's former financial director, the man who had supposedly disappeared 5 years earlier. Daniel reached into the suitcase and pulled out one final document. This is the part your father never told you. I took it. It was a DNA report. My name was printed at the top. I stared at the result. Then I read it again. My hands started shaking. I looked at Daniel. What is this? He didn't answer. I looked back at the paper. The result was clear. Probability of paternity, 0%. I couldn't breathe. I whispered, no. Daniel's voice was barely audible. Claire. I looked at him. My father wasn't my biological father? He shook his head. And then he said, there's something you need to know about the man who was. I stared at him. Who? Daniel slowly reached for another photograph. He turned it toward me. And the face in the photograph was someone I had never expected to see. My mother. Standing beside Richard Cole, and behind them, was my father. But the photograph was dated only 2 months before his death. I looked at Daniel. Why were they together? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, because Richard Cole is alive. And that's when I realized the man I thought had disappeared 5 years ago had been hiding 30 minutes from my house. And somehow, he knew exactly where I lived. Because Richard Cole is alive. Those were Daniel's words. And somehow, they were even more terrifying than the DNA report. I stared at the photograph. My mother, Richard, and my father. Together. 2 months before my father died. I looked at Daniel. Why were they together? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a chair. Sit down. I sat. He placed another folder on the table. Your father knew Richard was alive. How? He found him. Where? 30 minutes from your house. My stomach dropped. Why didn't he tell me? Because he was afraid. Of Richard? Daniel shook his head. Of your mother. I stared at him. Daniel explained that 7 years earlier, my father had discovered that my mother was secretly moving money through his company. But that wasn't the beginning. It went back much further. Before my parents were married, my mother had been involved with Richard Cole. Richard was my biological father. My mother became pregnant. Then she married Michael. My father believed I was his daughter. He raised me, loved me, and for years he had no idea. Until a medical emergency when I was a baby. A doctor noticed something unusual in my blood type. My father became suspicious. He secretly ordered a DNA test. The result came back, 0% probability. He wasn't my biological father, but instead of abandoning me, he chose to raise me. He never told me. He never told anyone, until Richard came back years later. Richard wanted money. My mother gave it to him. At first small amounts, then larger ones. Eventually, millions. They used my father's company, shell companies, fake invoices, hidden accounts, and eventually, accounts created in my name. My father discovered everything. He threatened to go to the police. My mother threatened him. She told him that if he exposed her, she'd make sure I was blamed. Daniel showed me copies of the accounts. They had my name, my signature, my social security number, everything. I stared at the documents. But I never signed these. I know. Then who did? Your mother. How? Forgery. I felt sick. Then I remembered the night my father threw me out. The proposal. The argument. The way my father had looked terrified instead of angry. He wasn't furious because I refused to marry Daniel. He was panicking because his plan had failed. I asked Daniel, what was the marriage supposed to accomplish? Protection. For me? Yes. If you and I married, Victor's family would have taken responsibility for you. I shook my head. So my father was trying to get me into another family because he knew mine was dangerous. Yes. Why didn't he just tell me? Because your mother was watching you. I remembered the photographs. Someone had followed me. My father knew. He was trying to protect me. But he chose the worst possible way. He made me hate him. Daniel opened the red notebook. The first page contained one sentence. If Claire ever reads this, I failed her. I started crying. Daniel turned the page. There were dates, bank transfers, names, meetings, and notes about me. Where I lived, where I worked, my college schedule. Not because my father was stalking me, because he was tracking threats against me. He had hired investigators to make sure I was safe. Even after I left. Even after I stopped speaking to him. He knew where I lived. But he never contacted me. Because he believed contact would put me in danger. I asked, what happened to the money? Daniel pulled out another document. Your father created a trust for you. How much? About $2 million. I stared at him. $2 million? Yes. When? 6 months after you left. My eyes filled with tears. I had spent 7 years working 2 jobs, taking student loans, living in a tiny apartment, and my father had been saving money for me. But then I asked the obvious question. Where is it? Daniel looked at me. That's the problem. He handed me a statement. The account had been emptied. Every dollar. I stared at the transactions. The money had been transferred to another account. Then another. Then another. Finally, it disappeared into a private foundation. The foundation was controlled by Richard Cole, my biological father. I felt numb. Richard hadn't just stolen from my father's company. He had stolen from me. Daniel said, "Your mother helped him." I stood. "I want to find him." Daniel nodded. "We already did." He handed me an address. 30 minutes from my house. I stared at it. "Why didn't you take him to the police?" "We needed proof." "You have proof." "Not enough to connect everything." I grabbed my coat. Daniel stopped me. "Claire, you can't go alone." "I won't." We went together. The house was enormous. White walls, black windows, expensive cars, a perfectly maintained garden. A woman opened the door. She looked at me, then at Daniel. "Can I help you?" I said, "I'm looking for Richard Cole." Her expression changed. Then a man's voice came from behind her. "Who is it?" He stepped into the hallway, and I froze. I knew immediately. I couldn't explain how. Maybe it was the eyes. Maybe the face. Maybe the strange feeling that happens when you see your own features on a stranger. He stared at me. His face went pale. "Claire," I whispered. "You know me." He didn't answer. Daniel stepped forward. "Richard." Richard looked at him, then back at me. I thought Michael would take this secret to his grave. He did. Richard looked confused. "My father is dead." Richard closed his eyes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he whispered, "He never told you?" "No." "What? That you're my biological father?" Richard looked like someone had punched him. He sat down. I remained standing. I asked, "Did you know?" "Yes." "How long?" "Since before you were born." I felt anger rising. "You knew I existed?" "Yes." "And you stayed away?" "I was told to." "By who?" "My mother." I frowned. "My mother?" Richard nodded. "Your mother told me Michael would destroy all of us if I came near you." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because he believed I was dangerous." "Were you?" Richard looked down. "Yes." That answer shocked me. He admitted everything. He had been involved with my mother. He had helped her move money. He had used my identity. He had taken the money from my trust. But he claimed my mother had controlled him. I didn't care. I asked, "Why did you call me?" Richard looked confused. "I didn't." I froze. "What?" "I never called you." I looked at Daniel. He looked equally confused. Then I remembered the threatening phone call. "You've been looking in places you shouldn't." Richard shook his head. "That wasn't me." "Then who was it?" Richard stood. "I think you need to leave." Before we could move, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. "It's Laura." "My mother." Richard answered. "Hello?" We heard her voice. "Is Claire there?" Richard looked at me. I stepped closer. My mother continued. "Don't let her leave with those documents." My blood ran cold. "She knew." "She knew we were there." Richard asked. "How did you know?" Silence. Then my mother's voice became cold. "Because I've been watching her." The call ended. Daniel immediately called the police. But before they arrived, Richard said something. "You need to know what happened the night your father threw you out." I stared at him. "What?" "Your father wasn't going to throw you out." I frowned. "He was going to tell you everything." "Then why didn't he?" "Your mother arrived first." Richard explained. My mother had shown my father the forged bank records. She told him I had stolen confidential files. She convinced him I was planning to expose the family. My father didn't believe her, until she showed him the photographs. The photographs of me meeting Daniel. She told him Daniel was using me to investigate the company. My father panicked. He thought Daniel was working for Victor. He believed I was already involved, so he made a decision. He would make me hate him. He would force me away. Then he would protect me from a distance. I started crying. "Why didn't he call me later?" He tried. Richard looked down. "Your mother intercepted the letters." "What?" "She destroyed them. Every letter my father had supposedly never written had been destroyed by my mother. Every attempt he made to reach me had been blocked." Daniel looked at me. "There are records." He pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of letters, 7 years' worth. My father had written me every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary of the night I left. He had never stopped. I opened one. It said, "Claire, I hope you're safe. I know you probably hate me. I can't blame you. But please believe me when I say this. Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done." I couldn't continue reading. I broke down. Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. For 7 years, I thought my father had forgotten me. He hadn't. He had been waiting. Then the police arrived. Richard surrendered. He agreed to testify. But my mother was still free, and she knew we had everything. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. But I did. What do you want? She said. I want to see you. No. Claire, please. You lied to me. I was trying to protect you. I laughed. You destroyed my life. You don't understand. Then explain it. She became silent. Finally, she said, Your father was going to kill himself? I froze. What? He was going to confess everything. She said she had been afraid he'd go to prison, afraid I'd lose both parents. So she tried to control the situation. She admitted she stole the money, admitted she forged documents, admitted she manipulated my father, but she insisted she never intended for me to get hurt. I asked, Then why did you let me live like that? Silence. Why did you let me believe Dad hated me? I thought you'd be safer. Safer? I was screaming now. I slept on a floor. I know. I worked 2 jobs. I know. I thought my father didn't love me. I know. And you watched? She started crying. I made mistakes. No. I interrupted her. You made choices. She didn't respond. Then she said, I'm still your mother. I closed my eyes. No. She went silent. You were my mother when I needed you. But now you're just the person who hurt me. I hung up. 3 days later, federal agents arrested her. The investigation became national news. Millions of dollars. Multiple shell companies. Identity theft. Fraud. Money laundering. My father's company collapsed. Victor Hale testified. Richard cooperated. And eventually, the truth came out. My father had spent the final years of his life trying to undo the damage. He had secretly created the trust. He had gathered evidence. He had hired investigators. He had written me hundreds of letters. And he had planned to tell me everything. But he died before he could. 6 months after the trial began, my father's lawyer contacted me. He had one final package. Inside was a video. My father had recorded it shortly before his death. I almost couldn't press play. Then his face appeared on the screen. He looked older, tired. But it was him. Claire. I started crying immediately. He took a breath. I don't know if you'll ever see this. He looked down. If you do, then I'm probably gone. He smiled sadly. I wish I could tell you that I made the right decisions. He paused. I didn't. My tears continued. I should have trusted you. I should have told you the truth. I should never have let you believe you weren't loved. He looked directly into the camera. But you were. You always were. He told me he had watched from a distance. He knew about my college graduation. He knew when I got married. He knew when Emma was born. He had seen photographs. But he never approached me, because he believed my mother was still dangerous. Then he said, Claire, if you hate me, I understand. But don't hate yourself because of what happened. You were never the problem. He smiled. You were the only thing I ever got right. The video ended. I sat there for a long time. Then I finally understood. My father wasn't perfect. He made terrible decisions. He lied. He pushed me away. He hurt me, but he loved me. And sometimes people can love you and still hurt you. That doesn't erase the pain, but it can explain it. 2 years later, I visited his grave. I brought Emma. She was 6. She held my hand. Mommy, is this Grandpa? I nodded. She looked at the grave. Was he nice? I smiled. He tried. She thought about that. Then she said, That's okay. I laughed through my tears. I placed flowers on the grave. Then I placed one photograph. Me, Emma, and my father. It had been taken years earlier. Before everything fell apart, I had found it in one of his files. On the back he had written, My girls. I sat there quietly. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't feel angry. I felt sad, but peaceful. I finally understood something. My childhood had been built on lies. My family had been held together by secrets. And the people I trusted most had betrayed me. But that didn't mean I had to continue their story. I could write my own. I changed careers. I became a financial fraud investigator. Every day, I helped people uncover secrets hidden behind bank statements and shell companies. Sometimes I wondered if my father would have been proud. I think he would. Daniel and I stayed friends. We never got married. Neither of us wanted to confuse our friendship with the expectations our families had once placed on us. He became part of Emma's life in a simple way. No promises. No expensive gifts. Just consistency. And I learned that was worth more than money. As for my mother, I never reconciled with her. I eventually forgave her. But forgiveness didn't mean letting her back into my life. It meant I stopped allowing her choices to control my emotions. Richard served his sentence. I never called him Dad. I don't think I ever will. He was my biological father. But biology doesn't create a relationship. Time does. Love does. Showing up does. And he didn't. My father did. In his own broken way. 7 years ago, I walked out of my parents' house with 2 garbage bags and $86. I thought my life had been destroyed. But looking back now, that was the night my life actually began. I learned how to survive. How to work. how to build something without anyone handing it to me. I learned that family isn't always about blood. And I learned that sometimes the people who claim to protect you can be the ones who hurt you the most. But I also learned something else. You don't have to spend your entire life trying to get an apology from someone who hurt you. Sometimes you have to stop waiting. Stop asking why. Stop hoping they'll finally understand. And start building a life so peaceful that their explanation no longer controls you. I still miss my father. I still wish he'd told me the truth. I still wish he'd trusted me enough to let me choose what to do. But I don't hate him anymore. And that's enough. Because the last thing my father ever wanted was for me to spend my life trapped inside his mistakes. So I didn't. I built a home. I raised my daughter. I built a career. I found people who loved me without conditions. And every once in a while, when Emma asks about Grandpa, I tell her the truth. I tell her he was complicated. He made mistakes. He hurt people. But he loved me. And I think that's the most honest ending I can give her. Because life isn't always divided into good people and bad people. Sometimes it's just broken people making choices. Some choices destroy families. Some choices save lives. And sometimes, you don't understand which one it was until years later. 7 years ago, my father told me I wasn't his daughter anymore. 7 years later, I discovered that I was never his biological daughter. But somehow, he was still my father. And maybe that's what family really means. Not who shares your blood, but who stays in your heart, even after they're gone.